The floorboards of the Blackwood Tavern didn't just creak. They groaned under the weight of a decade of spilled whiskey and broken spirits. Clara knelt in the center of that grime, her breath coming in ragged, shallow hitches that burned in her lungs like lye. Blood, metallic and warm, pooled in the cup of her hand, staining the tattered lace of her collar. Above her stood Silas, a man built of muscle and malice, his shadow stretching across her like a shroud. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The heavy silence was his favorite weapon, a precursor to the storm of his fists that had defined Clara's life for 3 long, hollow years. She stared at a spilled bottle of cheap rye, watching the amber liquid seep into the wood, wishing she could disappear into the cracks along with it. For 3 years, the town of Oakhaven had looked the other way. In this corner of the American frontier, a man's home was his fortress, and what happened behind closed doors was considered a private providence. Clara had been a vibrant daughter of a Prairie school teacher once, full of dreams about the iron horse and the changing world. Now she was a ghost inhabiting a bruised shell. Silas had methodically stripped away her voice, her pride, and her connection to the world outside their cabin. To the town, he was a hard-working blacksmith. To Clara, he was the personification of a lawless land where might made right. She had learned to navigate the geography of his rage, knowing which look or which tone of voice would trigger the lightning, but tonight the lightning had struck without warning. The heavy thud of Silas's boot moved closer, the sound echoing against the timber walls. Clara closed her eyes, bracing for the impact she knew was coming, praying only that it would be fast. But the blow never landed. Instead, a sudden, sharp draft of cold prairie air cut through the stagnant heat of the room. The heavy oak door, which Silas always kept barred against the world, swung open with a slow, rhythmic whine. The sound was so unexpected that even Silas froze, his fist half clenched, his head turning toward the light. Framed in the blinding glare of the afternoon sun stood a silhouette that looked as if it had been carved from the very mountains of the west. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dust-caked duster coat occupied the doorway, his wide-brimmed hat casting a deep shadow over his face. He didn't rush in. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, a living statue of denim and iron. The air in the room shifted instantly, the humidity of fear replaced by the ozone of an approaching reckoning. In his right hand, held loosely but with practiced ease, was a Colt Peacemaker, its steel barrel catching the stray glimmers of light like a predator's eye. Silas snarled, his ego bristling at the intrusion. He demanded to know who the stranger was and what business he had, interfering in a man's private house. The cowboy didn't answer immediately. He took a single step forward, the spurs on his heels singing a sharp, metallic note against the floorboards. His gaze didn't fix on Silas. It dropped to Clara, who was still trembling on the floor, her hand over her mouth. In that brief moment, Clara saw his eyes. They weren't filled with the chaotic fire of Silas's anger. They were as cold and steady as a winter creek. He saw the blood, he saw the bruises, and he saw the 3 years of stolen life written in the hollows of her cheeks. The stranger spoke then, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate the very glass on the tables. He told Silas that the wind had carried the scent of a coward all the way to the trail, and he had decided to stop and see if the smell was as foul as he imagined. The insult hit Silas like a physical blow. Silas was a man used to being feared, a man who ruled his small world through intimidation. To be called a coward by a nameless drifter was an indignity he couldn't endure. He reached for a heavy iron poker near the hearth, his face contorting into a mask of feral rage. Before Silas could even draw a full breath to roar, the stranger moved. It wasn't a frantic movement. It was a blur of absolute efficiency. The cowboy didn't fire his weapon. Instead, he closed the distance in 2 long strides, the heavy barrel of the Colt connecting with the side of Silas's head with a sickening crack. The blacksmith collapsed like a felled oak, his massive frame hitting the floor with a force that made the rafters rattle. The room fell silent again, save for the heavy, terrified sobbing of Clara, who couldn't process the sudden shift in her reality. The monster who had haunted her dreams was lying unconscious at her feet, defeated in a heartbeat by a man who didn't even know her name. The cowboy holstered his weapon and knelt beside her. He didn't reach out to touch her, sensing that any sudden movement would send her spiraling into a panic. He stayed back, giving her space, his presence a protective barrier between her and the fallen man. He spoke softly now, telling her that the long night was over. He told her that out here under the wide American sky, there was supposed to be a code, a sense of justice that went beyond what was written in law books. He told her that no person was meant to be a footstool for another's cruelty. Clara looked at him, her vision blurred by tears, and for the first time in 1,000 days, she felt a flicker of something she thought had died: hope. He helped her to a chair, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked to the pump in the corner, wetted a clean rag, and handed it to her so she could clean the blood from her face. While she tended to her wounds, he methodically searched the house. He found the small tin where Silas hid the money he earned from the forge, money that Clara had never been allowed to touch. He brought it over and set it on the table in front of her. He told her this was her passage, her way out of Oakhaven and toward a life where she could breathe again. He told her the stagecoach headed east would be passing through at dawn, and she needed to be on it. Clara asked him why he was doing this. She asked him who he was. The man just adjusted his hat, the shadow returning to his face. He said he was just a man who had seen enough of the world's ugliness and decided that today he'd rather see a bit of justice. He told her that the frontier was a hard place, a place that tested the soul, and that sometimes the only thing keeping the darkness at bay was the willingness of a stranger to stand in the gap. He spoke of the vast prairies, the high Sierras, and the promise of a country that was still finding its heart. He told her she was part of that promise, a survivor who deserved to see the sun rise without fear. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, the stranger dragged Silas's unconscious body out toward the town square. He didn't hide what had happened. He left the blacksmith, tied to the hitching post in front of the sheriff's office with a note, pinned to his chest that simply read, "A coward's debt." The townspeople gathered in the shadows, whispering, watching the tall man in the duster as he walked back toward the tavern. Nobody dared to stop him. The moral weight of his presence was heavier than any badge. Back at the tavern, Clara had packed a small satchel. She stood by the door, her legs still shaky, but her gaze fixed on the horizon. The stranger walked her to the edge of town, where the dirt road stretched out like a ribbon into the unknown. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't ask for a reward. He simply stood with her in the cooling air, a silent sentinel against the ghosts of her past. He told her that when she got to where she was going, she should tell people that the West wasn't just a place of violence, but a place where a person could start over, no matter how broken they were. When the lanterns of the stagecoach finally appeared in the distance, flickering like low-hanging stars, Clara turned to the man one last time. She touched his sleeve, the rough canvas of his coat feeling solid and real. She thanked him, not just for saving her life, but for giving her back her soul. The cowboy nodded once, a sharp, respectful gesture, as the stagecoach pulled to a stop and Clara climbed inside. She looked out the window. The man was already turning away, walking back toward his horse tied in the shadows. He didn't look back. He rode out into the desert night, disappearing into the vast, unforgiving, yet beautiful landscape that had birthed him. Clara sat back against the leather cushions, the rhythm of the horse's hooves matching the newfound beating of her heart, as she left the 3 years of beatings behind and rode toward the first dawn of her new life.